So as I said, magic in Warhammer is basically represented by the winds of magic, what's called the winds of magic. And these are kind of flows of energy that sweep across the world. And there are basically 8 different kinds of, 8 different winds, and each of those relates to a specific kind of magical lore, and so it lends itself to a certain kind of spell casting. And the winds, though they call them the winds of magic, they're not truly winds. They just use that to represent the concept that it's kind of an ebb and flow of energy that just kind of washes across the world and sweeps through the land, and that wizards, people who are attuned to the winds of magic, can sense the presence of this energy. But human wizards, and I'm not going to go into necessarily the backstory for human wizards versus high elf wizards, but essentially human wizards have been regarded as not being capable of understanding the greater spectrum of what is called high magic. And it's considered very dangerous for a human to try to dabble in more than a single wind. To try to control more than a single wind of energy is generally considered to be impossible for a human. So the 8 different orders, one order studying each of the winds of magic, are focused in the wind that they have studied. So, in game terms, a human wizard can only ever be dedicated to a single lore, to a single wind of magic. And so, consequently, what makes wizards very different in Warhammer than, say, in Dungeons & Dragons is you don't have any generalist wizards. You don't have a wizard who can do everything. The wizard has to... or the player, when making a wizard character, has to choose which wind of magic his wizard is attuned to, and that wind of magic will shape the types of spells that he has access to. The 8 winds, very briefly, and let's see if I can remember them all, are the lore of fire, the bright wizards, who are basically, all their magic revolves around fire, heat, and the explosive nature of that energy. The gold wizards, who are the lore of metal, and basically the lore of shaping and transmuting metal. I think their ultimate objective is, transmuting lead into gold, and that sort of thing. The lore of light, which is, all about light energy. The who are, gosh, what are they called? I think they're just called the Light Order. There's the Celestial Order, the lore of the heavens, which is all about kind of foresight, portents, omens, kind of reading the future, but also I believe they have some ability to kind of manipulate lightning or something like that, as I recall. There is the lore of beasts, the Amber Order, who is all about kind of, they can transform into animals, they can also control animals, and have, various kind of natural spells, or, nature-oriented spells, maybe kind of like what you might consider in Dungeons & Dragons to be a druid. You also have the lore of death, who are the, I can't remember the name of the order, but the lore of death is about kind of controlling the forces of life and death, and I believe they don't only deal death, but I believe they also have, maybe it's not healing, but they have some kind of ability to manipulate the energy of life. There is the Jade Order, who is specifically to life energy in specific. So whereas the lore of death is all about kind of dealing with death and the afterlife and that sort of thing, the Jade Order is specific to growth and naturally promoting plants and the natural environment. And then there's one more order who, I'm trying to think who I've missed. And I can't think of it at the moment. It'll probably come back to me. But so, each of these orders, each of these lores has specific spell lists that go with it. So if you are a bright wizard of the order of fire, of the lore of fire, all of your spells that you have access to are generally going to be kind of oriented in that nature of manipulating fire, creating fire, combustion, and that sort of thing. And so that tends to translate to the fact that bright wizards, as opposed to some other types of wizards, are very destructive, in that most of their capabilities, at least magical capabilities, are of a destructive nature. So they lend themselves very well towards being battle wizards. Basically being the kind of wizards you'd want by your side in a fight. And I just realized the order that I had forgotten was the Lore of Shadows, the Grey Order, who is the order of kind of deception and lies and stealth and deceit, that sort of thing. And their magic is all kind of about beguiling, misleading, concealing, and that sort of thing. And so, using the Grey Order as an opposite example, whereas a bright wizard might, his magic is very destructive and very forceful and very kind of, I don't want to use the word obvious, but it's blatant. The Grey Wizards are specifically much more kind of subtle with their magic, or their magic is intended to keep things quiet, to keep things out of the mind's eye, and to kind of conceal. And so, while a Grey Wizard could still be very useful in battle, he's not going to be the outright kind of forceful wizard that a bright wizard would be. So you don't have a situation where every wizard has his utility spells, his magic missile and his fireball and everything like that. But rather, wizards are very specialized. They tend to be, or their magic anyway. They could develop other skills if they wanted to, certainly. But their magic tends to be focused around a single kind of theme, and so they are kind of the masters of that theme. But that means that the other wizards, they don't overlap a great deal in their usefulness. So even having a party of maybe more than one type of wizard wouldn't be that redundant, because if the wizards are from different lores, they're going to cover very different elements. They're going to have very different utility within the party. But I like the flavor of magic in Warhammer. The other element, because current magical theory states that magic within Warhammer is derived from the energies of chaos. That the argument is that chaos is kind of subdivided into these 8 different types of energy, or at least it's channeled in these 8 different ways, and that it grants the wizards who can perceive and manipulate that energy with great power. But you're still tapping into what is essentially the primordial chaos goop, and anytime you do so, you are risking taint, corruption, backlash, and all other sorts of nasty things that are associated with the forces of chaos. So magic in Warhammer is very risky business, and any spellcaster is always going to have that kind of nagging kind of fear that something may go wrong in the casting of one of his spells. And sometimes these kind of chaos miscasts, these chaos backlashes, might be really relatively minor, but sometimes they can be surprisingly catastrophic. And so wizards, as often as they throw around power, kind of invite misfortune. So as a result, in the setting, wizards are very, very much frowned upon. And in fact, there are entire... Now, the the 8 colleges of magic, those who specifically dedicate to the studies of the lores, they have been kind of given sanction within the Empire. They are allowed to practice their magic because they are of use to the Empire politically. They represent, they possess various abilities that would be very useful to their society, especially in fending off their enemies. But likewise, there's still kind of an ancient grudge that reaches back thousands of years, an ancient superstition against those dark forces of magic and witches and witchcraft and the corruption of chaos. And so people are constantly afraid that someone will walk into their town and they corrupt their children or steal their souls or whatever it is. So there are religious orders that specifically are dedicated to kind of tracking down and hunting unsanctioned spellcasters, and you have witch hunters who are pretty much take a shoot first, ask questions later approach about it. So even a sanctioned wizard, supposedly sanctioned wizard, who crosses a witch hunter or crosses a religious organization in the wrong way may find himself at the end of a noose. And so they are magic is very much persecuted within the Empire, at least arcane magic in a way. But you also have that brings me to the various religious orders. You have, I believe it's nine major faiths that exist within the Empire and their pantheon. Of course, the dwarves and the elves have their own sort of forms of religion. They have their own gods that they revere in their own ways. But within the humans of the Empire, they have an array of gods that represent kind of the different primal elements. You have a god that represents kind of the ocean and storms and the rivers, and then you have the gods who represent Mother Nature, the wilderness, kind of the natural balance. You have Ulrich, who is the god of war and winter, who has his devotees are sort of barbarian warriors. Ulrich is kind of more than the god of war. He's the god of battle. He is the god of kind of the strength of the warrior, the ferociousness of courage, and that sort of thing. And then you have Sigmar, who was the first emperor, who is revered as a god, and all of these different gods and their priests. The priests can channel powers from their gods, divine favors, and as a result of which, so you also have kind of divine magic. Now it's a little bit different. Than, again, like maybe a Dungeons & Dragons fantasy setting, or clerics in Dungeons & Dragons, in that not every priest has the ability to heal, but rather the priests, again, are specifically aligned and specifically kind of colored by the deity that they worship, and the spells and favors that they can draw upon from their god, are kind of skewed towards whatever that god's domain happens to be. So you have a god like Shalia, who is the goddess of mercy and benevolence and healing, who grants her priests the powers to heal wounds and cure disease and that sort of thing. But not every priest even has those types of abilities. Whereas a priest of Ulrich might have more spells that are oriented towards imbuing warriors in battle to help them succeed in battle, Sigmar is kind of in a similar vein. He's kind of a god of justice, or that sort of thing. So his powers tend to be very martially oriented. But then you have the nature gods who grant spells with domain over nature, animals, plants, the natural order. So again, it's very unique in its approach in that it's specialized. Even priests are not genericized within the setting. But So I think I've kind of gone on long enough about that, and probably I know I'm leaving a lot of background detail out, but trust me, there is so much of it there that I really couldn't touch all of it. It's a very open world with lots and lots of potential, and like I said, on the surface, it's kind of Tolkien-esque, generic in what you might perceive, but really the element that makes it different amongst the various minor changes, like in the magic systems and whatnot, is really that it's ominous, it's dark, it's dangerous. You know, every step into the woods, your characters are risking their lives, and so they should go in with the mindset that they're prepared for, you know, significant kind of consequences whenever they stray off the beaten path, or even when they're on the beaten path, they have to be careful of who they trust, because the people around them may not be quite what they seem. So that kind of, I hope that kind of gives a general picture of what Warhammer is and what the various forces are that operate within it. But let me talk now about Warhammer Fantasy 2nd Edition.